What I love about the Sunshine Coast is the healthy, clean living. We have this wonderful lifestyle built around that. We're more relaxed, a little bit more casual, no tie here. If we don't start now planning in a way that will protect what we have, but just allows growth to happen unplanned, then we will lose so much of the beautiful parts of our Sunshine Coast.
I think the Sunshine Coast has always had a sense of itself. The challenge for an urbanising, growing region is that you can lose that sense of yourself and you can become like any other place, and people then get disconnected from the place that they know. And if development's done in an appropriate way that's sensitive to the environment and that resonates with the place and the people of the place, I think that you can actually have a very successful future.
We've got a lot of challenges that have been placed in front of us on the Sunshine Coast in terms of how we are going to meet the growth projections and how we're going to manage that growth over time. And that's something that we have to confront. It's not something that we can shy away from.
The casual way of the holiday house is now making way for densification. How do you do that?
Protect our natural assets and not let urban sprawl continue to develop, and so densification and and being smart about how we densify is going to be really important.
We need to make sure that we don't design for the last 30 years, that we actually design for the next 30 years, and that's anticipating people's needs. So what we can do is establish the kind of core principles that we as a community agree upon. And then it's not up to me or the next person, it's up to all of us to make sure that those principles are underpinning and run through any piece of design we do.
Good design ensures competing issues can be considered holistically, and that our parks, streets and buildings reflect the values that our communities hold dear. Good design is essential to ensure our future communities are both livable and lovable.
It's an exciting and a challenging time for the Sunshine Coast. Our population is currently at 320,000 people, and by 2041 we're going to be over 500,000 people. And that means that there's a lot of change coming, and this project is really about shaping that change. Council has tasked the Design and Placemaking branch to develop a Sunshine Coast design strategy. The strategy will identify the natural and built characteristics of the Sunshine Coast that we all hold dear. Those things that we want to see protected and enhanced in future built form. This is for anyone creating, influencing or funding design. It's really important that this strategy reflects what is important for the Sunshine Coast. And in order to do that, we had to ask our stakeholders and our community what they really value, what they cherish about this place. We have undertaken a very rigorous engagement process to develop a set of values and principles to guide design and inspire future projects on the Sunshine Coast.
Whether you're new to the Sunshine Coast or you've been here forever, this book is a really good conversation starter with everybody that's involved in the whole design process. What we found through a lot of our research was that, and we already know this, is that we love our climate and we love living here because of that climate.
Well, one of the things that happened on the Sunshine Coast historically is that it was used by people from the city as a recreation destination. This led to the evolution of a very relaxed, casual type of architecture where it was all about sense of place, natural ventilation, natural light, taking advantage of views and vistas, and of course the integration of landscape.
We have a beautiful history that's dramatically tied to the landscape. There's a lot of place names like Maroochy, Ngindiri, Coolum, Majimba, and these are the First Nation people's ancestors, but they're also key characters in their moral teachings about how you should live in society, and they're tied to the landscape. That's a very special, unique and rare foundation to build this region's sense of self.
It was so exciting to see the amazing amount of feedback we got from our community, from our design profession, from our development industry and from our building industry, all saying the same thing. And it was all about landscape and how important it is to actually recognise its presence and the opportunity that we have to embed our future built form into the landscape. We can start having really creative and interesting conversations and not start to erode it, and actually look at how we can cleverly integrate the landscape into our future built form.
Take the idea of water and the movement of water and what water does to the landscape. It actually has shaped the whole landscape. And then when we start layering the humanity and our communities on that landscape, it's the interaction with the elements. They're all underpinned by the role of water.
Our communities are as diverse as our landscapes, and they're passionate about their distinct values, stories and lifestyles. This is an inherent quality that contributes to the character of the Sunshine Coast. We have a lot to learn from our first people, the Gubbi Gubbi and the Jinnaburra, and as new people arrive, the layers of culture, heritage and creativity on our places will grow.
Through good passive design, we can design with good solar orientation, with great shading and with good natural cross ventilation, these most marvellous spaces for, very pleasant occupation, but also significantly thereby saving enormous amounts of energy. And then what comes out of that is a very beautiful and unique and Sunshine Coast specific architecture. So the language of the architecture sort of embodies the characteristics of the Sunshine Coast.
Well, Sunshine Coast is really made up of a series of landscapes. There's so many different characters within the area. There's the hinterland, there's the coast, wetlands, beaches, and really the character of each place is defined by its landscape. Understand what the topography is, understand what the levels are, look at where the existing vegetation is and where new vegetation needs to be to provide for privacy and buffer and climatic response, and really take those things and map them as a trigger for all the design ideas to start with.
We seem to be a place that everyone loves and wants to be, and so we've managed to attract over the years, a really wonderful collection of creative and interesting people. They come to the coast to explore their creativity, but also to find some creativity and find some inspiration. So one of the great opportunities for design is to provide a focus for creatives to come together through place and architecture and our streets and our cities and towns, and really engage that artistic and creative community in a really public way.
The Sunshine Coast culture is definitely linked to its landscape. We have a beautiful landscape of coast and the hinterland, and cultural enrichment needs to be linked to that, both the Indigenous settlements but also the European way they settled those landscapes. And our cultural heritage on the Sunshine Coast needs to be derived from that.
We can actually give effect to those stories really powerfully and in a really creative way, which then adds another layer to people's experiences of those places. You're unlocking things that are already great and in that place and simply giving effect to it through the design process.
Well, the Sunshine Coast is such a beautiful landscape. Why wouldn't we capture our views and vistas? We could be something that actually really creates joy and memory in our landscape. And the way you arrive over Buderim and look over the coastline, or the way you're standing on Alexandria Headlands, we need to capture those experiences. The thing about designing for views is all about framing the view. So sometimes trees, while some people think that they can obstruct a view, they can actually make it even more picturesque and more beautiful. And the Sunshine Coast, particularly with its reputation for natural assets, vegetation is a really important part of our views and vistas.
We're really lucky on the Sunshine Coast to be surrounded by nature. It's everywhere. It's in our backyards, it's in our parks, it's our waterways, it's our beaches. And that produces a whole lot of green corridors and open space networks. When we begin to recognise these spaces as assets, we can preserve and protect them if necessary, and then where appropriate, we can begin to use them as walking and cycling pathways and leaving the car at home.
It's really important to understand the community you're working in. Place-based design and character are not style-based. They're actually a reflection of the community that they live in terms of material selections. The character and materials on a regional town was going to be quite different than a coastal town.
Honesty of materials and legibility of structure is something that's really important. If you're going to use rock, then use rock, show it as real rock. If you're going to use steel, express the steel. If you're going to use materials like timber, show what the species is.
There needs to be a greater cooperation between all of the different design disciplines and design our services and our roads around these canopy trees instead of doing them as an afterthought.
We really need to make sure, from an engineering perspective, that we've made the street and the road reserve and the verges wide enough to accommodate all the services that we need for a community to use.
It's important for people to walk and cycle to activate streets so that businesses, cafes, restaurants can be attractive. It's also important to get people out of their vehicles.
This principle is talking about putting people at the centre of design thinking. It's really important that our built environment is accessible, affordable, and capable of accommodating the needs of our growing and increasingly diverse community.
Public places need to be accessible and dynamic with emerging technologies and considering the uses by everyone.
It's really about how to live with our climate, anticipate some of the big events like heavy rainfall, storms, or even drought.
This is a really important principle because it's really about the future in ways. I mean, the whole strategy is about the future, but this one's really about looking ahead and thinking about those big things that are really going to be different. Population, more and more people moving to the area. We're going to have different types of jobs and a different type of economy. We're going to be getting around in different ways. And then of course we're going to have those key challenges of climate change. So obviously we can't keep designing places the same way. I mean, that's a really challenging task, but it's a really exciting one as well. Thinking about what that future could be and making this a really resilient place.
Design professionals, developers, professional bodies, the community council officers and councillors have all been involved in activities to help develop the 4 draft Sunshine Coast design values and the 9 design principles to help influence the way we design for this beautiful region. Now we want to know, have we got this right? Please go to Council's webpage, have your say, fill out the survey. We'd love to hear from you.